Morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it is for you guys. Welcome back. It's now 2022. So remember how 2021 was going to be so much different from 2020. So let's see if 2022 is any better. But so far, to be fair, 6 days in, going good. So I think we're all set. So welcome. We're going to spend the next hour going through live with your images in Capture One. So that thing, that piece of software is the raw processing software that is written by the guys in Copenhagen. And it allows us to take an image taken from your camera in raw format and edit, hopefully improve, and hopefully get back to what you saw at the point that you took that image with your camera. So before we get started, we're going to just make sure that we're all on the same sort of baseline. We're on to version 22. Just in case, by the way, I look a bit tired, I have jet lag for the first time in about 20 years. It seems that if you spend 20 years flying and then 2 years not, the first time you do fly somewhere, you end up with chronic jet lag and you're up since stupid o'clock in the morning. But there we go. Every day's a learning day. So for the next hour, we're going to be using Capture One version 22, which is that version up there. If you go to the About menu in Capture One, you'll see the box that's just above me right now. If you're on the latest version, it will say version 15.0. That is version 22, so the numbering is slightly different. You've got a version number, which is the software version, and then you've got the marketing number, which is Capture One 22 being for 2022. Which was released in 2021. So that's the current version. If you are running version 21, don't worry. Most of the stuff that we're going to run through today is perfectly applicable to version 21 and 20 for that matter. There are a few new tools that have been introduced with 20 and 21 and now 22. But most of the stuff, apart from things like HDR and panoramic stuff, you'll be able to follow along with just fine from 21. If you're on an older version, you have the option of upgrading. Go to your CaptureOne.com account, log in the top right-hand side, I think it is. In there, it will show you in your account the options that you've got for your license. Everyone's license is different. Some people have a permanent one. Some people have a subscription license. If you're on subscription, you have access to the latest version anyway. That's what you pay for. If you're on a perpetual or more permanent license on one version, then you'll get different options to upgrade based on which particular version, whether it was a branded one, whether it was a pro license, and you can choose whether to go up to the current version of 22 or stay where you are. All up to you. If you have not moved to 22 and you're on a subscription or are thinking about it, that's what's in 22. So you've got panoramic stitching, you've got HDR merging, auto rotate, kind of handy for some images. On others, less so, but in general, it's a nice addition. For those of you using the upper end Canon cameras, the latest versions, the wireless tethering option, certainly with a battery grip, is a nice addition. And of course, there's always all the bug fixes and performance stuff that happens with all versions. So if you are running version 21 or previous, and you want any of those things, you're going to have to move to 22. They are not going to be brought into 21. Likewise, all new camera support and all new lens support from this point forward will only be in version 22 from now on, effectively. So there we go. That's the version that we're running. And let's load up then version 22 and start having a look at your images. Let's have a little look. We're going to actually start with Wilfred's image before we go into Claudio's city stuff. And this image it was actually an HDR blend that Wilfred wanted to look at. And the question was that it was pixelating basically when it blends, going a bit wrong. So this is an HDR shot or a bracketed shot. So you've got one image which is exposed for the highlights, these windows, and one image which is exposed for the shadows, so this one here. And in theory, I should be able to click on these, right click, go merge to HDR. I'm going to leave auto adjust and auto align on, you'll see why in a bit, and hit merge. Capture One is going to do some work up here, and it's going to deliver me a raw DNG file, so a completely editable file of the two merged. And in this file, I can see that if I pull back our highlights and pull back white and maybe even exposure a little bit, well, I got the detail in the windows. which I didn't have in this version. So it's taking that from this shot. And I've got all the shadow detail as well. It's a little bit off in white balance. I might want to fix some of that stuff. But, you know, it's blended it. But there is a problem, and this is what Wilfred's talking about, which is, let's look out here. And you've got all this pixelation stuff going on. All this sort of like bad plaster. It's patchwork. So what's going on there, and why is it occurring? The challenge that I have with this shot is I can see there is a big problem with the blend, and I'll explain what it is in a minute. I don't know necessarily if it's actually causing this pixelation or these digital artifacts. It may be that having 2, 3, 4 more brackets, so in other words, the difference between this one and this one, having some more steps in between, may fix these artifacts. I have seen that now. So sometimes you need less brackets, sometimes you need more. It depends on the scene. But I can't even consider that as an issue until we fix the biggest issue with these two shots. And it's about how you capture an HDR image. So here is our shot of the underexposed, or the shot for highlights. And here is our shot for the shadows. And I'm going to do that switch again. And I want you to have a look really carefully at the position of the windows. So here's our one for the shadows. And I'm going to switch now to the one for the highlights. Shadows, highlights, shadows, highlights. It's moving. The position of the camera, or the position of the lens, has moved. If we look at this edge here and this edge here, yep, there's definitely some movement between this one and this one. And if we look at the edge here versus, and let's just pull this one up so we can see what's actually going on. So I can see some of the trim here on the right hand side. I can't see as much of it, if any, on this one. So we've got an issue here where the camera has shifted between the two brackets. Now that's not normally too much of an issue, because when I go to my HDR merge, Capture One actually has something that fixes that, which is the auto align and auto adjust. Auto adjust means that it will try and create a middle exposed output, which is why you get all of these sliders automatically baked into the DNG. But auto align is designed to allow for some movement in the camera between the brackets. Okay. So in theory, that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And in fact, if I look carefully at this shot, we can see, look, where the overlap actually is and where it doesn't work. So there's two shots effectively at this point here. Outside on the border, it's relying on one shot. We're getting a lot of pixelation in there. It's not looking too great. So the auto align is working, but it's still delivering these artifacts, which isn't great. And here's the problem. This shot here, taken at f13, 0.4 seconds, ISO 100. At 33 millimeters. This shot here, f9, at 100th of a second, at 32 millimeters. Now, it's okay to shift your shutter speed, which is exactly what you should be doing when you're trying to get those bracketed shots. But if you change, number one, your focal length, so 32 to 33 millimeters doesn't sound like a huge difference. But in terms of what the camera actually sees, that's quite significant. It's not a small amount of movement. That 1 millimeter at this point is pretty big, especially on that sort of wide lens. But it's the aperture that's what's worrying me the most. So this is at f9. This here is at f13. So we're asking Capture One to blend two different images that were taken with two different shutter speeds, which it's designed to do. That's what an HDR bracket is meant to have. But also two different apertures, which means you've got different depth of field. It means you've got potentially a different focal plane, potentially, depending on what the autofocus was picking up, and two different focal lengths. Slightly, granted, 33 to 32, but it is two different setups of picture. So I'm not surprised that Capture One is delivering a less than perfect result. It's going to do that if all those variables change. So be really careful. And we talked about this with panoramic stuff when David and I were live in London a few weeks back. But HDR is no different. So if you are doing bracketed shots, Do not change your aperture. And that also means, in the case of this one for Wilfred, I think I saw this earlier, this shot was taken manually, completely manually. This shot was taken with aperture priority mode. So changing the aperture, and then the camera will figure out what to do with it elsewhere. For bracketed exposures, you've got to be on manual. You have to be on manual. You need to fix your focal length, you need to fix your ISO, you need to fix your aperture, and you need to fix your focus point, not just focal length, but the point that you're focusing on, so that the only thing that's moving between all of those different brackets is the shutter speed. If you have the camera, and some lenses will move in and out as they zoom as well, and some point, or sometimes the focus point will move based on zoom as well. But if you've got a set of bracketed images with differing apertures, differing focal lengths, different focus points, I'm not going to be surprised if you see some of this stuff. So I can't say for sure that that's what's causing it, Wilfred, unfortunately. But as a place to start, we've got to start with two images which are completely correctly overlapping and have common settings in terms of aperture and focus. So be really careful. If you want to do bracketed shots, especially indoors like this, ideally on a tripod, ideally use the mode if your camera has it. I'm not sure if this one does, but many cameras now will have a bracketed mode that you can load in and say, I want 3 shots, 3 stops apart, 5 stops, 2 stops apart, and so on. All of that stuff gets done automatically. If not, set everything you can to manual and just change the shutter speed in between those shots. Do not allow autofocus to recalculate. Do not allow program mode to decide your aperture or decide anything else, or ISO for that matter. You want to keep everything stable apart from shutter speed. So, as I say, I don't know. Actually, where were we? Someone's just said, still no excuse or explanation for the speckles. No, because I can't, I don't know whether it's being caused by the fact that, and think about this, in one of the images, this cover here is blurrier or more blurry than the other. So I don't know whether Capture One is interpreting this sharpness as noise and trying to blend it. There's too much wrong with this blend to know whether or not these speckles are caused by bad input or there's an issue somewhere in Capture One. If there is an issue in Capture One, then genuinely we need to start sending bug reports in. So as I always say, for things going wrong, go to support.captureone.com, submit issues. If you see an issue with any of the new features or old ones, go onto the support site, submit a bug report. They may ask you for some logs. If ever you're asked for logs, under your scripts menu, you can't see the top of my menu, but under scripts, there's an option there that says get logs. You get that. It's a compressed file. You can send that off to Capture One and they can see exactly what's going on in the background when things are being processed. But until I can see something clean, it's really difficult, knowing that the input isn't great, to work out what's going on with the output. So that's enough of HDR today, I think. Let's have a look at Claudio's shots. We've got two or three shots, but these two are very similar. So we'll probably do an apply to the second one without too much hassle, just copying and pasting the settings. So first thing on cities. This one is London, unless they've moved the Shard and the Millennium Wheel, or London Eye or whatever it is, sponsored by now. So a few things with this. Typically, our cameras will tend to deliver a warmer white balance than most city shots appear, to our eyes, that is. So effectively, what I'm trying to do is balance. I wasn't there at the time. I don't know what this looked like in detail, but we're always trying to balance what our eyes saw, what our brain saw, which is slightly different to what our eyes saw. Eyes are lenses, brains are sensors, two different things. And what your camera has determined was the white balance, especially if you're on auto at the time, to even up that scene. So the camera, remember, is trying to get everything in the middle. It's trying to get white to be neutral. It's trying to get your exposure to be middle grey. All of the stuff is middle, middle, middle. Sometimes we want our exposure down. We want our white balance cooler. We want our tint, which is typically to get rid of color cast, but we may choose to use that artistically. And in this shot here, generally speaking, in cityscape terms, I would always, I'm just going to get the white box away from me, over my head. I would always tend to suggest that cityscapes at night sit somewhere between 2400 and 3000 Kelvin in terms of our white balance within Capture One. So if I just pull this down, let's get to maybe, I don't know, maybe there. That sort of fits to me. That looks about right. I may choose to play with tint. So if we want a greeny sky, we can do that. If we want a reddy sky, we can do that. But try and keep this natural, or as natural as we can get. But that to me feels more like a deep city shot, rather than pressing the Y key to get my before and after. The sort of murky, in some ways, harsh reality of city life, with what's going on up in the air. So let's just turn off our before and after and then think about what else we want to do with this shot. I'm going to leave the little rooftops in. Kind of cool. I like the perspective of it. But the Shard and all the buildings out in the background are pretty murky. They're pretty hazy. Bit of a hint. Out in the distance. We've lost quite a lot of detail. Now, in old school ways, we would just rely on the clarity tool. We could do that and we could get it to punt or to pop. But you also end up with things like halos around dark areas and so on. And where the contrast joins are between a dark object and a mid-tone object, you start to see artifacts that show you've overused clarity. So we do have the dehaze tool. Now, dehaze tool got brought in I think it was version 21 from memory, or maybe it was later in 20, one of those two. And it's a way of, effectively, the dehaze tool is using the existing tools in Capture One, but as a bit of a recipe, as it were, to fix this problem in itself. So if I scroll up with our dehaze tool, we can see it is sharpening and getting more detail and more punch to the buildings here, but it's also removed that blue tone that I just put in. Why? Well, because the shadow tone is set to auto, and the shadow tone for the dehaze tool is what Capture One is told to remove. So if I just reset this tool, what Capture One's doing with the auto shadow tone function is looking at the whole image and working out if there's a common pattern to the shift in every single pixel from effectively neutral or white, so the average of all those pixel values, and has it been shifted to something that seems out of line? So has it gone way yellow or way blue or way red or whatever? So let me just clone this, and I'm just going to reset here. And you'll actually see, look down here at the shadow tone. The original one saw the shadow tone, or the haze that it wants to remove, as this sort of color up here, this sort of light grey blue-ish. Watch this little box here, the auto selection, when I switch to my new cooler image. You see it's gone a bolder blue. It's more of a cyan, more of a punchy blue. It's more saturated. So be aware that the auto shadow tone is calculated based on the base image that you're using. So as I change the base image to be more blue, what the dehaze tool sees is there's a lot more blue in this image. That must be haze, so we need to get rid of it. So then when I pull this up to get rid of that haze, we also get rid of the color tone that I added in. So instead, we use this tool here to tell Capture One where our haze is. And you can see I've told Capture One it's more of a dark purple. It's out here in the clouds. And now if we look at without and with, without and with, we've now lost all of the haze that was blocking all the detail in these areas without shifting the color too much. If I don't like that shadow tone, I can pick another one, or another one, or another, or this tone, or that tone, or you know, we can have a lot of fun with this, but you're looking for a tone to choose out of the sky or mist or cloud or whatever it is that you're trying to get rid of that doesn't have a negative impact on the color tone of the overall image. And I'm sort of settled there, I think. Now, we've turned things a little bit more green, I've noticed in that. So I might want to either push our tint a little bit more higher, or if I was really worried about specific green, I can go into our color editor, choose, actually we could even do it on basic, but I'll go to advanced, choose the color picker, and I can say, well, it's this sort of color here. This sort of, it's not quite that, it's probably more around here. I don't want to affect the blues. So let's now shift that saturation down on this greeny cyan color. So we now have, if I do a before and after, a shift from where we were to a much cooler image with a lot more detail, a lot more clarity, less haze, hence the point of the dehaze tool. But there's still not enough punch to my eyes in terms of these buildings and so on. Still want to work on those a bit. So let's go on to our exposure tab. So this is where we spend most of our time in Capture One. And with that exposure tab, I'm actually going to do something a bit unusual. So normally we would do this. We'd pull down shadows if we want to darken things. But we have a problem with this shot, which is all of my data, pretty much, apart from this really bright spot here, and you can follow the yellow line as to where things are in Capture One. So in the histogram, this white area of light on the top, you can see the orange line is way at the top on the histogram. Other than that, the sky, these buildings, this stuff in the front for sure, it's all in the shadow. So trying to separate the sky from the buildings by using the shadow slider isn't going to help me, because as I bring down the shadows, it brings down the buildings, but it also brings down the sky. What will separate it is the black slider, and normally we'll use the black slider to lift up shadows. We'll try and get data back and detail back into the shot. But let's just pull this down here, and we can see that it started to separate. Let's just temporarily undo. Look at my histogram. It started to separate the darkest elements by pushing them darker from those sort of lower midtones. And with that, I can then pull up either our brightness or exposure to offset it. And I get a much, much more defined skyline as a result of doing that. So I don't want to push exposure too much. And in fact, what I'm going to do is pull down my highlights and whites so that I can see more information coming into these windows. Let's just do a without and with. So I'm recovering the highlights, recovering the whites, but I'm also then making the black elements, or the darkest 5% of the histogram, darker to add in some contrast. Now, of course, we've got the contrast slider too. I can pull that up a little bit, but bear in mind, and this is the thing, remember where most of my data sits and what the contrast slider does. So the contrast slider, almost imagine a line down the middle, and it says, right, if you're brighter than the middle, get yourself brighter again. If you're darker than the middle, get yourself darker again. Well, everything in this shot, apart from the top lights, is darker. So all it's going to do is make the whole shot darker. What instead I can use is a little bit, not too much, a little bit of clarity. So clarity being almost a local contrast adjustment. So tends to work best in the sort of middle tones of an image, but it's looking for neighbors, and it's effectively saying, rather than straight down the middle, brighter, get brighter, darker, get darker still, it's looking at where two different areas join, and it says, at a variable basis, are you darker or lighter than your neighbor? If you're lighter, then get brighter. If you're darker, then get darker again. So a little bit of clarity on this shot will really help make it punch. I've just seen a couple questions. So, Michael, what's happening to the left of the bottom right tree? I think this is old firework. So I think that's the start or the end of a firework. That's just some of the tails, if that's what you're referring to. I did see it. I thought there's something on the lens, but no, it's part of a firework display. Paula, how about using levels? Yes, we can use levels, but actually in this case, you'd almost want to use the curve because by using levels, you know, I can switch the midpoint, but again, it's a pretty big blunt tool for really detailed changes just in one area of the image. I could pull the dark here, the black point to be higher than 0. So in other words, rather than waiting until something has no data in its RGB value to be completely black, we can shift it to say, actually, if you've only got 5 out of 255, you're now going to be completely black. But again, that's shifting the whole thing left and right. If anything, what we'd probably want to do is maybe add, let's just create a floating curve tool. Sorry. So we can see it in a bit more detail. If I go to our Luma curve, with our curve, if I know I want to affect this bit but not this, I can put some anchor points in and say, right, we're going to lift up the sky here and we're going to darken down everything else. So you see what we've done as a result of doing that. It's a minor adjustment, it's a micro adjustment, but only on the bits of information that we're actually using. Whereas levels is just split in 3, the midpoint, the white point, and the black point. Curves, we can actually take the data in here, just this data, and make tiny adjustments to certain values, regardless of whether they're a highlight, a shadow, or anything else like that. So with that change done, let's just do a with and without. So that's without. That's with. We do get a bit more of a pop, but it would be something that I wouldn't suggest using levels. I would suggest using curve instead. Jamie, that's yes. So some of these tools need to be quite precise, obviously. So you wouldn't necessarily want to do a load of levels work in a way that you're so zoomed out here and whatever. So you can add the levels tool into one of these areas here, whichever tab you're on. You can just right click, add tool, and then we can pull levels or curves in. If you want a floating version of levels, go to your window, go to create floating tool. You can do it to any of the tools that are available, and it will load in as a standard size like that, but I can then do that. Gets a bit tough to see everything on the screen, but we can see in a lot more detail and have a lot more precise control over this curve without needing to worry about trying to do it at a pixel level. Okay, so with that done, let's just look at anything else in this shot that I'm worried about. Not particularly. I might want to darken this bit on the right hand side. I think it was to Michael's point. Let's just add a quick little layer brush. Let's choose a reasonably sized brush, really soft, not too much opacity. I'm just gonna draw into there and just pull that exposure down a little bit, just so that we don't distract. So maybe that helps. I don't know. Firework right hand side. Okay. Now, I've done all those changes on this one. I think that looks a lot more vibrant, exciting, whatever we want to do. But I want to apply it to this. And I've seen a lot of people get confused with this about edit selected, not. Really simple. I can copy from one image and I can apply those settings to the other by using up here, this copy and apply, or Command or Control C, or Control Shift C, I think, from memory. I do it, yeah, Command Shift C, which is your copy, and Command Shift V, which is your paste. Now here's the thing. If you have made some changes already to this one, and I copy these changes, Command Shift C, you notice I've got a layer called Firework right hand side and background. On this one, I've got 2 layers. So let me paste it again. Let's just do that apply again. It's added another one. Apply, it's added another one. And all that's happening is I'm getting more and more and more of these right hand side layers. Bear in mind, and this is something that I'm seeing people get tripped up on. If I make some changes to the picture or the image that I'm copying to, so applying the adjustments to, and then I reapply from the source, it's going to take everything from the source and reapply it to the adjustment. So in this case, take this example. I've deleted that layer because I don't need it on this shot. So let's just apply. So I copied from here. Apply it back to there. It's going to add that background or the firework layer back in again. It's going to keep adding layer after layer after layer every time I apply it. You imagine you've got a picture with 5 layers and you copy those settings, you copy the adjustments, they go into the clipboard, you go to a new picture and you paste them. Great. You get a background and 5 layers. Wonderful. Then I make some changes to the original and I go back to my second picture and paste those changes in. It doesn't replace the changes, it adds to them. So you'll have your background, your 5 layers, and your new 5 layers with the changes in. So I would always recommend, if you're going to make changes to your, let's call it template shot, make the changes in here. So let's say we push the brightness up a tiny bit. Oh no, that's on the firework layer. Let's get the background. Brightness up a tiny bit more. Copy those settings. So Command Shift and C, or copy up here. Go to the one that you want to apply it to and reset it. Reset the image first, then apply. And it's going to put in everything that matches this one into here. And now, of course, this layer here, my mask over here, I don't need on this one because there's nothing to fix on there. So I'm now going to delete that layer. But be really careful with the copying and applying. When you copy from one image, it takes every change you've made, including the layers. When you paste it into another image, it doesn't care what's already there. It's going to paste everything as it was in image 1 across to image 2. Right, and that's a quick way. So we've made some changes in this image. It was taken at the same time as this one. So I've now got 2 images with the changes applied, and both looking pretty nice. With that highlight change, by the way, let's just look at a firework. This is down to personal preference and personal choice, so please be careful and aware of what you're doing with this. Remember, I pulled in highlights and whites all the way down. So if I were to reset the highlight, you see I get that glow in the middle of the firework. And likewise, if I reset the white, I get even more of a glow in the firework. So just be careful that you're not using the HDR tool, I guess, to fix a load of stuff that then in the next picture, in this case, so I didn't need any whites or highlights in this shot. I wanted to recover it all. But having pasted those settings into this one, it would be a shame to lose that glow in that firework. So what I'd do in this case, I'd probably create a new layer and say filled adjustment layer. On that layer, I'm going to uniquely just use the highlight and white recovery because I want it all back from all of the office windows and everything like that. Great. But I don't want to apply it to the middle of this firework. Well, that's easy now. It's on a layer. So let's just call it white and highlights. Press M to see my mask. I can go to my eraser tool and I can erase my whites and highlights change here. Because this the firework is on the background of something which is not a white or a highlight, I'm being really, really rough with my eraser. It doesn't make a difference because everything else around this firework, as you can see with the little orange bar, is sat on that left-hand side inside the shadows. So having it erased doesn't make any difference because these 2 tools don't affect the shadow. But I've now got my glow of my firework back. I could do the same to this one, same to this one. So you can be selective with it. It's the same adjustment as I had on this one. It's just on the original. The adjustments were made on the background layer because I didn't need to erase anything. You cannot erase from the background layer. So if I want to be selective over where those adjustments are applied, well, I can just put the specific adjustments that I'm trying to be selective with on a new layer and then erase or put a hole in the bits that I don't want to affect. So that's our fireworks. City stuff. Generally speaking, you hopefully will see why I tend to use a slightly cooler tone for a city than what most cameras will do with an auto white balance. Generally in cities, they will make them look yellowy and murky and whatever. I think in part because cities are generally yellowy and murky. I think our brains probably look at them and think they're cooler than they are. But also the camera is probably warming it up a bit too much. So the reality is probably somewhere in between. To me, 2400 up to sort of 2900, maybe 3000 is that sweet spot on a city, and it just looks a lot cooler as well at night. Okay, let's have another. I'm just going to have a look at one of the other images that Claudio sent in, because he sent a few in over New Year. Cool. And there's something odd in this image, and I tell you what, I don't know the answer for it, which is a bit weird because it's not an editing one. I'm not sure what's going on. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So this shot here, arguably a good HDR candidate. But let's just have a look at what we have got in here. So here's our shadow detail, and this is the first thing to look at whenever you're trying to work out how much you can recover out of an image. Pull up our exposure and see what we've got in the shadows. Is it noise free? Yeah, it is. It's looking pretty nice. So the shadows I'm not worried about at all. Okay. What about the highlights? So let's pull the exposure down. Do we have a load of data in the sky that wasn't necessarily there in the in the actual capture, in the middle point? So here, let's just go to our exposure warning, and let's just see big exposure warning on the right hand side, basically telling us that, let's just reset it, all of this stuff here is way overexposed, 255, 255, and so on. And we can see that up here on our little readout, our RGB readout. The red is 255, the green is 255, the blue is 255, the luminosity is 255. What we call that in general terms is bright white. There's no data available here. But the camera stores more than just the visible RGB. We know that. It stores a bigger raw histogram when you're shooting in RAW. So what we can do is pull back some of that data. And you can see actually there was a lot more. So this is just one big blob of overexposure here. As I pull this back, that overexposure starts to disappear. So let's go into here. There's strands of cloud, there's color, there's blue in the sky, there's yellow, there's reds. And as I'm moving the mouse around, we're seeing these values up here are no longer stuck at 255. There's no more exposure warning. There's an underexposure warning because I've darkened the image. But we're looking pretty good. There's a lot of data in there that the camera actually stored. But then I see this. And I don't understand what's causing it. I have seen similar in some forms of frame average shot, but this was a single 15-second exposure. And I don't know, was that the cloud shape? And maybe the cloud had sort of judders in it or something like that. But this is weird to my mind on a long exposure. I wouldn't expect to see patterning like that in the cloud. My suspicion with it is maybe it's something to do with the filter that's in use. Maybe there's some repetitive pattern in the filter and the lens is struggling to resolve through it or something like that. But there is something weird going on here. It may be that this is a natural phenomenon, this banding going on in the clouds, because it doesn't exist in the sky and it actually gets wider. The sections get bigger as they get further out to the right hand side. But there's something odd going on up here. Now, I'm not too worried about it because we've got some other tricks that we can use, but there is something that I can't quite explain that's going on up there. So, knowing that our shadows have relatively noise-free detail, and knowing that our highlights are completely recoverable, we can do it through exposure. We could do it with a Luma range, but you don't really need to. You can use your HDR tool. So your high dynamic range tool, and I have seen this on a few forums online. Be careful now that Capture One allows you to do HDR blending. It doesn't negate the existing tools. It was a bit like when dehaze came out. Everyone was dehazing everything. And the temptation is, well, it works, it does the job, so great, we'll use dehaze on every single shot that we ever take. Same with HDR. So you do not need to shoot bracketed in a lot of situations, especially if your camera has a decent dynamic range. And in this case for Claudio, it does. We can see how much we can recover with just the existing high dynamic range tool. My suggestion, personally, when it comes to HDR, use a bracketed version where you can't do it with a single shot. That's the challenge. But I wouldn't use HDR as the go-to. I would use it if the shot is particularly tricky. If you can do it using the existing HDR or high dynamic range sliders, then go for it. And in this case here, we don't need to use a bracketed shot. We can achieve what we want using those sliders. So all I've done is adjusted. I've brought the shadows up a tiny bit just to get a little bit more detail. I can recover most of our exposure stuff through this highlight thing. Get some little bit of weird stuff going on up here, and we've got this weird patterning going up there. Jamie's saying perhaps a combination of ND and polarizing filter. It may be, maybe it's a circular polarizer or something that's giving off some weird patterning. I'm not entirely sure, but there's something definitely not quite right up there. So let's have a look at what we can do up there to try and fix it. So we know that we want to affect the sky, not the buildings. So traditional way of doing it, we would just add a graduated filter, because that's going to have an effect up here and not down here. But that is still going to overlap some of these buildings. Not ideal. I may try and pull this up a bit, but I'm now going to add on a luma range. And that luma range, we're going to discount anything that's dark and keep everything that's bright. So this should now also, beyond just the gradient filter, should also remove anything that's dark in these buildings too. So I'm going to apply that. So even though this is at 50%, it shouldn't affect that rooftop. And with this, I'm going to go to my clarity tool. Remember earlier we used clarity to add contrast and add detail. I can use negative clarity to get rid of it, and negative structure to get rid of the detail and or textures and patterns and stuff like that. Now, if that's not enough, well, what we could do is create another layer, and I can copy the mask from adjustment layer number 1, which I did. That's copied everything across, so same settings, and I can do negative clarity again and negative structure again. Now, these aren't ideal, you can see, but it's a way of subtly getting rid of some of the jaggedness up here. So let's just zoom up here. In fact, I'm just going to create a clone of this variant so you can see with and without. So on our right hand side is without the changes, on the left hand side is with, and you can see you've got a lot more smoothness in the left hand side, and you don't have quite the same banding, so this line effect that's going along there. By pulling out some of the clarity, so getting some negative clarity in there on the left hand side, we're able to in some ways smooth it out, but not all. And again, if I wanted to go even more, remember you can load on clarity over clarity over clarity, and negative clarity over negative clarity over negative clarity. There is a limit, so be careful, but you know, it can work. And certainly here it's improving it. You can see, you know, with the change, without the change on the right, it's not perfect, but it does sort of start to smooth things out a little bit. Ralph saying, could you use the skin tone tool? Not really. And the reason, unfortunately, is the skin tool is going to be based on a color range. So what you could, but I'd have to use the skin tone tool to uniform all of the oranges, all of the pinks, all of the blues, all of the grays. And if you look, let's take up here, for example, the dark lines are sort of grey, whereas the bit that's not is sort of blue, or blue in the knot, and then a bit of pink, a bit of grey. It's going to be really, really tricky to do that. So, you know, we can do this to soften it down. We can also, with that top layer, undo some of our highlight recovery so we can make it less obvious, because obviously that recovery is what's driving some of that detail to be so obvious. But yeah, it's definitely worthwhile trying to work out what happened there, because it worries me when I see things like that when they come back into Capture One from being out there. What caused that recording of that image to be that way. It's a bit odd. Overall, so with that image done, in fact, let's not do I was going to do a straighten, but this has already been cropped down. So on our lens tool under rotation and flip, in 22 we've got our magic wand, and that will automatically rotate and correct it. Now we do have a bit of keystone lean on this shot. So what I mean by that is on this side it's probably not too bad, but on this side where the building's a lot nearer to us, got a bit of lean in on the London Bridge building on the right. So let's have a little look at our keystone tool. And all I'm going to do on the right hand side is just pull this to match the lean of those buildings and hit apply, and we should get a nice clean line. So this is now upright, and this is feeling more upright on the right hand side. So we've got rid of that sort of lean in. Wallace, I think what you're seeing in the cloud is wave cloud. Do you know, this is what I said sort of earlier on. Maybe it is like that. Maybe that is just part of how it looks. But what doesn't quite make sense is the fact that these patterns are sort of circular like this. So here it's almost horizontal, going up the image. Here you can see it's going across the image like that. It's almost like it's a radial sort of thing from a center point. I don't know, maybe it is a natural thing, but what doesn't add up to me is over a 15-second exposure, for that to be the case, looking at these patterns, what we're seeing is the cloud stopped, moved a bit, stopped, moved a bit, stopped, moved a bit, stopped, moved a bit. And wind in the upper atmosphere doesn't really work that way. It doesn't sort of go forward, stop, forward, stop, forward, stop. That doesn't quite make sense to me like that. If it was a static shot and the shape of the clouds was like that, yes, no problem. But this is happening over time, over 15 seconds. There's something, I don't know, there's something weird. But you may be right. Absolutely, it may be a natural phenomenon. I just don't know what it looked like naturally. Okay, one thing then, sort of finally on here, is the crop. It's nice having all of this stuff down here and the water being nice and smooth over an extended period, but we don't need it. We genuinely don't need all that water, and it's not helping the shot necessarily. So I'd be in a place where we crop this in a lot tighter, either 2x3, or if we're going for on screen, we go 16:9, so we can go even more tightly bound in there. I'm just going to pull this in a little bit on there. Okay. And then we get into a relatively good place. But yeah, let's call that one a day, because I can't work out what's going on the top. But that's the changes that I make. So genuinely, if you can avoid using a bracketed exposure, and you can do it out of one shot with decent, low levels of noise, decent shadow information, decent highlight information, you don't need to go through the bracketed process in order to get a shot. You can use Capture One's built-in high dynamic range tool. It does a great job. It always has done. And if your camera has a lot of dynamic range that it stores beyond that standard RGB, almost JPEG histogram, then use it and use the tools to get the most out of it. So those ones, we spent quite a lot of time on these, but there you go. There's your little tour of London over over New Year. I think that was the New Year stuff, but I may be wrong. Okay, let's switch across to Jamie's shots. So here's our original. Here's Jamie's edit. And there's a few things here that we're going to probably have to fix in some of the editing stuff. If I look at the layers that Jamie's got, we've got on here a mask for the grass down here. We've got a lot of clarity added down here. And one of the things I think that Jamie was talking about was there's a lot of noise in here. Whereas in the original, you see there's not a lot of noise. So we go from no noise to quite a bit. And yet it's not a huge amount of clarity. It's not a huge amount of structure. I've been through it. There's something else going on. So we'll get to that in a second. So we've got a background clarity layer with a really harsh drop off. I would be really careful about using gradient filters with that sort of drop off, because what it means is you've got clarity happening literally here and not here, because that drop off is so hard. I would personally, if you're going to do that, I would just soften that drop off or fall off a bit more, so it's less obvious where that boundary is happening. Okay, let's just clone that one. Right, so I'm going to edit on this one instead. I'm just going to reset that so we've always got our original to refer to. So for those of you that aren't familiar with variants, new year, we might have new people. So the way that Capture One works, all of these here are the same raw file. There is this isn't a different raw file with each one. These are variants of the same raw file. Imagine a variant is like a container for all your adjustments that sits on top of the same raw data. So if I want to make some changes, I can snapshot those changes by right-clicking and going to Clone Variant. And what that does is it takes what I've done and creates another variant of the exact same raw file. It's not duplicating the raw file. It's the same data still there. But it takes the container of all the adjustments and puts it into, in this case, variant number 3. I might want to color code it. So I can use a keyboard shortcut, or I can, on here, go into color tag, and I can change our color tag. I can change a rating with different stars. But this is a way of me allowing myself to snapshot different ideas. So we might go down one route for one variant and one route for another. That's all we're building up, but it's not creating huge amounts of data or duplicating files. It's just creating new containers with different adjustments each time. So let's have a little look about what's gone on here. Jamie's just said that's not how it looks on my screen at all. So it may be that it was messed up in the exporting. If you're talking about this here, the bright bits on the outside, Jamie, it's simply down to, don't worry, the light fall off here. So this light fall off for some reason is way up. Maybe that was something that was clicked accidentally or whatever. But let's just pull that back down and we're back to normal. So don't worry. So if you'd done that intentionally, I was going to say try and back it off. If that's not how it's meant to look, then yeah, it may be that just light fall off got either corrupted in the export or something like that. But light fall off is great if you have a lens which vignettes at the edges. So if it does that, then you use this to brighten up those corners and it evens out the frame. If you're doing panoramic stitching, you need to use light fall off and set it to 100 so that you don't get the dark light as Capture One tries to stitch it together. But if you overdo light fall off, whether intentionally or not, you will end up with this, which is glows at the outside and then the middle is left alone. So if ever you see this and it's wrong, the first place to look actually isn't even light fall off. It's in here in your exposure tab at the bottom normally, and make sure you haven't got vignetting up. So vignetting to the left makes things darker at the edges. Vignetting to the right makes things lighter at the edges. Make sure you haven't done that accidentally. If it's not vignetting, it's possibly light fall off. And we'll just back it away. So now we're probably back to closer to what Jamie probably had exported. So all good there. Let's just have a look then at this noise in here and let's think about what can create noise. So there are some usual suspects with noise. And what I'm looking for mostly is, has the person either over sharpened the image, and remember you can do sharpening on different layers. So that's the default sharpening that came with the background. But have we added in extra sharpening? No, we haven't. Okay, so it's not over sharpening. Good. Could it be film grain that's been added? Well, in this case, no, it's not in there. Then I'm looking at, is it clarity and structure? Because if I overdo structure, I'm just going to do it on the background so you can see, you will see huge amounts of what seems like noise. It's not actually noise. It's Capture One forcing the details out. So structure is looking for texture and it's looking to enhance that texture. If it finds tiny bits of noise, it then uses that noise as a texture and makes it even brighter and even bigger and bolder. So structure is an awful culprit when it comes to what we think is too much noise, but it's not that. This was set to 0. Could it be clarity? So clarity can have a similar effect to structure, but on a basis of areas rather than on the basis of individual textures and finer details. But again, in this case, clarity was set to 0. There are some other layers in here where we've got clarity here on the background to 31. That wouldn't really do it. Not really bushes, sorry. It's not going to be on a heel layer. So what could be causing this to go from smooth to, yeah, pretty noisy or pretty grainy? And then I scrolled down and saw this. So we've got two changes going on, and this is one to be really careful with. The other thing to be careful with is, remember, there are 2 curves. Well, there are actually 5, but I could scroll down and look at the curve for this image and think that nothing's been altered. Remember, it might be under the Luma curve, which in this case it is. So remember that levels and curves are affecting the same thing, the histogram. And it's effectively trying to give you control over the highlights, the darks, the middles, and be able to tweak them and how bright they get, how dark they get, whatever, based on the section of the histogram. The levels tool, if you think about it as a simplified version of curve, allows you some very basic controls to say, get brighter, get darker, move the midpoint. Curves allows us to be a lot more precise. But the problem with curves, let me just undo this temporarily. So without, no noise. With, all the noise. And it's not actually necessarily a bad thing, this noise that's coming in. It's because Jamie's used the curve to get back all this detail in here by pushing down some of the shadows and brightening up some of the highlights. But in doing so, you're introducing micro contrast, you're adding contrast at a local level, and that can be perceived as noise. So if I go from here, which was the original, let me just pull back that light fall off. So quite a lot of noise and artifacts and so on up here, to this one, which has had that curve just settled down a bit, just calmed down a bit, then we get to a much better place. And I can use a touch of clarity now. And clarity is going to still bring out all of those textures and details in the mountains and stuff without all of the speckling and noisy artifacts and so on that go on here. So if I look at, this is the original. Down here is the version which is the cleaner version, or with a softer curve, less going on in it. And that's really, really going to improve things. So just be really careful if you're using levels and curves, because you get a sort of double whammy. We're already using levels here to brighten things up and darken down the shadows, brighten up the highlights. You could use it to move your midpoint, so we can brighten up that midsection, or if we wanted it darker, we can just shift everything in the histogram a bit to the left by moving this pendulum in the middle a bit to the right, and we get a cleaner image. But if you do wild sweeping changes in the whole image, and especially in a curve, because the steeper that curve, imagine the more difference between two tones that were only one RGB value away from each other. So if it goes from, let's say, 8 to 9 at a diagonal, it's nice and stable. The second I introduce a curve which has got a steep climb, that difference between 8 to 9 has now gone from, let's say, 8 to 9 to 6 to 10. So I'm seeing huge amounts of difference, which will come across as texture and noise and so on. Anthony, why clarity over sharpening? Because I don't want to sharpen the detail in here. I want to see the detail, and clarity is giving me a contrast bump. It's looking for micro contrast. It's looking for the light bits, make them lighter, the dark bits, make them darker, which isn't the same as sharpening. So that's sort of where I'd be. Now, whether or not the white balance and toning is right, that's going to be your call, Jamie. I would personally maybe warm this a touch, just to get to maybe there. But from your original, it's not far off, but that's probably where I'd get to. Okay, cool, makes sense. Sorry, sense. There we go. Cool, all set then. So that's probably, well, no, not probably, definitely it for this week. So we've got Jamie's landscape here. We've got Claudio's 3 city shots. Weird thing on this thing, so I've just seen someone has mentioned, David, on the cloud issue, could it be the live composite for long exposures? It could be, which is a form of sort of frame averaging. So maybe it's doing that. It's getting a load of individual long exposures and building a super long one, which might make sense because this does feel like a lot more than the 15 seconds it's claiming. So maybe it is that, but there's something definitely odd in there. And Wilfred on the HDR front, absolutely. If you can get another version of this where everything is locked in, so no changes to focal length, focus point, aperture, or ISO, just lock in all those brackets. We'll have another look and see if the pixel problem goes again. Right, so that's it for this week. We will be back on next week, normal time. In the meantime, I am back and around. I have a bit of a lag on my mailbox at the moment. I've got quite a lot of things to catch up on, sorry, but I'm slowly getting there. So we will continue all of this stuff in that Facebook group for those of you that are in there. But in the meantime, if you have files to upload, then use the WeTransfer link, so paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. Include either the raw file or your adjusted EIP file. Also include your name. No name, we can't put you into the editing. But upload your files. Let's get a new set of images for the new year. And we will catch you in a week's time. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.